All right, it actually joined. So we are recording. What we're going to do today, first of all, I want to thank everybody for joining. The turnout was very humbling, I guess, for Joe Silvaghi and myself. This was a brainchild we had on an afternoon when we saw some people asking for some VCDX workshops, and we were posting around the live events. We decided to throw this event together literally as an experiment. And then we essentially, just Joe and I were tweeting it out. Matt Vandenbeld started tweeting it. So we're currently sitting at 200 plus attendees. We were expecting about 50. So
you are now muted.
I thank everybody for taking a couple hours out of their day. So
you are now muted.
On this is the same workshop that we ran at Partner Exchange, and we will be running at the VMUGs the day before the VMUGs during the live events. What we've done is we've cut this down to about 2 hours, primarily because the live events have a lot of back and forth interaction with the audience. So we're going to go through a good amount of the material that is normally in the live sessions. We've actually added a few slides. We've updated some things because of some announcements, and we'll go through all those pieces. So we did start the recording. So this is basically what we're going to go through. We're going to talk about the program, VCDX program, and the process. We will touch on the design scenario and troubleshooting scenarios. This is where we cut out some of the interaction piece, because normally in the live situations we actually have audience participation in these. So we'll talk a little bit about it. I'll have Joe and Carl and Matt actually provide some insight as to these scenarios. We have a couple of old retired scenarios we'll walk through, and we'll talk a little bit about the kinds of things you want to do. So it'll be difficult for 200 plus people to all talk. So with that, some introductions. I want to apologize to my co-hosts. I didn't get a chance to add their information in here. So I'll start with myself. I'm Chris Colati. I'm VCDX number 37. I'm a principal architect and VCDX evangelist with VMware. I've been a panel member, so I'm an alumni of the panels. Most people follow me on Twitter. That's how we got so many people, I think, to attend this. With us, we've also got today Joe Silvaghi and Matt Vandenbeld, who are both VCDXs. They will be handling the Q&A chat window. So there's two different chat windows in WebEx. There's the regular chat window, which I'm seeing some activity on, which is great. And then there's an actual Q&A window. If you use the Q&A window, Matt and Carl and Joe can actually tag themselves to the question and then answer it. And then that answer will be recorded, and we'll be able to go through that later and maybe put an FAQ together. Or we'll use it to adjust things for the future online presentations as well as the live ones. We've also got Carl Childs, who a lot of you folks know now is the new program manager for the VCDX program. So he's on here to do some Q&A. He'll answer some of the generic Q&A around the program, which there's a couple of slides I'm going to get to where I'm sure there will be quite a few questions when it comes to the desktop and the cloud tracks, and we'll talk about that. So really, the intended audience for this has always been architects, administrators, and anybody who's really interested in VCDX. We've got some information on what the DNA of a candidate looks like, so we'll talk about that. And we see partners and customers alike. I'll be honest, today it's a lot of partners. We've got a couple customers out there, or even customers who have actually transitioned over to the partner space. So some supporting material, and some of this stuff is going to be getting updated over the course of the year, actually. So there is the VCDX certification site. There is now the new VCDX directory, which, to my own detriment, I didn't actually put that link in here, but I think most people on the call have heard it and seen about it. It's really easy. It's vcdx.vmware.com. That's where all of the current VCDXs are listed, and when you become a VCDX, you will be entered into that directory, and you'll be able to update your information. There is an old boot camp series with some videos. This is what we're trying to update with some of the video content from Partner Exchange. If the video came out, we're still waiting on editing to work on that. What happens with these, and when we record them, the challenge is the information is sometimes fluid. So there's been some changes that are temporary that we'll talk about for the June defenses. And as those things change, the recordings get old. So it gets very difficult to record these series, and we'll just continue to have these, and we'll record them as we go, and the updated information will be in there, and we can highlight that stuff. There is the bootcamp book, which has been out, that John Arashi and a couple other VCDXs wrote. That is been out for a little while, so it doesn't have some of the NV stuff in it. And there is then the community mentoring piece. So I would encourage everybody to hit some of these links and sites so that you can get familiar with different parts of these. And we'll talk a little bit more about the mentoring piece as part of the program. So with that, let's dive right into the program and the process. And just so everybody's aware, this is set up for 2 hours. We'll try to keep it to the 2 hours. If we end a little bit short, then that's okay as well. And then we'll post the recording on VMTN, and we'll post the subsequent recordings too. And one thing I do want to mention is we're doing this as this one time slot, so I should say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good early morning. I know some guys in Australia are on at 1 o'clock in the morning. If we do these again, we'll try to do them quarterly, and we'll try to do two. We'll try to do sort of a EMEA, U.S., East Coast, West Coast broad brush at this time, because we can kind of cover most bases with that. It's a little early on the West Coast, a little late on the in the EMEA side. But then we'll try to do an APAC one to cover Asia Pacific at a totally different time slot. So based on this attendance, that is something we're going to start looking at. And these are not set up in a series. So if you attend this one and then you attend the next one, you attend the next one, the content will be very much the same with the exception of any slides or updated information that we'd want to present. So if you go to one, that's great. If you want to speed through the recordings of another one to see if there's any new information, then by all means, that's what I would suggest. So what is the VCDX certification? Hopefully everybody on this call and this WebEx knows what VCDX is. It's a VMware Certified Design Expert. It is the highest tier of certification within VMware, so it sits above VCIX and VCap. It focuses on architectural skills beyond associate and professional on the VCap and VCIX. So it's really centered around presenting a design and sitting in front of the panel, and there's a lot of evaluation that happens over and above the sit-down testing piece. So we'll get into a little bit of that when we talk about the defense itself. There is 4 tracks. I think everybody's aware of this now. There is data center virtualization, which is VCDX DCV. There's desktop, which is VCDX DTM is now the new acronym. There is VCDX Cloud, which is CMA for Cloud Management and Automation. And then there's NSX, so there's VCDX NV for Network Virtualization. So any one of those tracks is something you can defend on, and we'll talk about each one individually and some of the different requirements that have fluctuated in the past week or so. We get this question all the time, why should you pursue VCDX? Some of the early folks like myself, it was a personal challenge. If you haven't read, I've posted, my journey on my blog site so that people can understand what I went through. And I think there's a lot of articles out there of other people's reasons, and I would encourage folks to develop your own reason for pursuing the certification. Maybe it's increasing value to the company you work for, certainly increasing value to your customers and your other coworkers that you have. So we've heard from some people that it provides a competitive advantage. There are some partners out there with 5 or more VCDXs, and they use that certainly as a marketing advantage and a competitive advantage. There is some community recognition, which I'll talk about in the next slide. But really, the reason why you want to pursue it has got to be up to you. I've had a lot of conversations with people where they want to do it because they've never really gone outside their box, and we'll talk about this as we go through this. For some people, this process is way outside the box for their day-to-day job. And some people we see go through this a few times, 2 and 3 times, and they may or may not be successful by the time they've completed it. And there's some reasons for that, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So, understand your reasons for doing it, and then decide on which defense date you want to go with, and just start working towards it. And I'll ask Carl, if you're on, if you could post, I know you're on, if you could post a link to the VMTN with the current defense dates. I didn't want to put that in a slide because it gets dated. That way folks can actually see what the current defense dates are for the rest of the year. There is an April 1st deadline for June. So something we actually announced this week from a community recognition perspective, we worked really closely with Corey Romero and the vExpert team. There's a couple of reasons we actually tried to get VCDXs named as vExperts. One of the reasons is there was about 2/3 of the current VCDXs who were not vExperts, primarily because they didn't fill out the application, but there were VCDXs asking, those particular VCDXs were asking for some of the benefits that vExperts get, in the regards of licensing and some other things, both from VMware and from partners. So we went to Corey and we said, look, we've got a lot of these guys who are asking for some of the same benefits that vExperts get. If we were to look at the pool of VCDXs, is there an argument by anybody that says that most VCDXs don't also exhibit the community aspect of what vExperts do? And everybody on both sides of the table agreed. So if you're looking at this path and you're not currently a vExpert, just know that this is one of the new benefits of becoming a VCDX, is you will also be named a vExpert throughout the year as the defenses happen. So I want to thank Corey and the vExpert team for helping us make that happen. It was a great win for the current VCDXs. Of course, there was a bunch of people that were both VCDXs and vExperts, and it doesn't necessarily affect them yet. However, now when we do some things at various events or we have a vExpert party, then everybody's already a vExpert, so it works out. So let's talk about the program structure a little bit. This is the new certification program structure that was announced about a month ago. As some of these things started changing. This is plucked right off of the blog post. Actually, that shouldn't have been timed. Where we talk about your VCA to VCP. Really, from a VCDX perspective, it starts with the VCP and goes up through what is currently the VCap layer. So there's still VCaps for data center virtualization. There was VCaps for cloud and end-user computing, which we'll talk about, and I'm sure this is where the boys will start getting hit with a bunch of questions. And network virtualization already has VCIX, so because it was new, it came out with VCIX. There's a transition from VCap to VCIX going on throughout 2015. So what makes that transition a little bit interesting is the VCaps are going away, they'll be retired, and they'll be replaced by the single VCIX certification. So today, if you earn your VCap DCA, you actually get a VCap stamp. If you earn your VCap DCD, you get another VCap stamp. When we go to VCIX, you'll get one certification known as VCIX, but you will, there is an exam for design and administration. So, also what was announced this week or last week was the immediate retirement of cloud and end-user computing VCaps. So, from a VCDX program perspective, this put us in a, for lack of a better term, most people in the U.S. know this term, a pickle situation, which is in baseball when you're caught between first and second base. We basically had to come up with a way to work around this, and what we decided to do was to temporarily, for the June defenses, anybody submitting for April 1st for a June defense, we are waiving the VCap requirement on both the cloud and end-user computing tracks only. So it simply means you have to have your VCP cloud or your VCP desktop, and then you can submit an application and a design for cloud and desktop without actually having to take the VCaps. You would be, if you do get accepted into the defense stage and you do pass the defense, you would be granted your VCDX 5 for cloud or your VCDX 5 for desktop. Then when VCIX is released, you would be able to upgrade to your version 6 by taking the corresponding design exams. So once VCIX is released, the design exams will be back in place, and then we will have that requirement back in place that VCIX is needed. So it's pretty simple when you think about it. We tried not to overcomplicate it. Everything stays version 5, as you go through the waiver process. We are sort of deferring questions around defenses later in the year, mostly because we need to see when the VCIX date actually drops and those exams become GA. Look for announcements on VMTN or Twitter from Carl and myself around that, because that is really the VCDX 6 version, right? So although the exams transition from 5 to 6, the certification for VCDX has its own transition period from 5 to 6. So we're trying to work that out now. It's a little bit of a chess game, trying to figure out, what's coming, or figure out what the next move is. And we have some information on when things are going to get released, but until they actually go GA, the exams are sort of up in the air. So this is a huge opportunity right now. So if you have been in the process of putting your package together for cloud or desktop, and you were short by an exam, or you hadn't taken the exams yet, or you were scheduled to take the exams and they got canceled, there is less to worry about. You can go ahead and actually still submit, and we'll waive that requirement for the 5.0 version. So definitely send some questions into the Q&A panel if you have some, and those guys will answer it. So we get this question a lot, especially since we've waived the requirement for the VCAP. I feel that a number of emails from people, both internally and externally, saying, hey, now that the waiver is out there, I want to quote unquote, throw my hat into the ring and submit my VCDX. And I think there's a little bit of confusion on what the process really is and how long it takes. So I thought it was important to sort of lay this out for everybody, because one of the conversations I had was, I'm going to start working on my design package and to submit for April. And I said, well, you only have about 3 weeks, and you're talking about a lot of numbers of hours to put this together. So do you think you're going to be able to make it for April? So I decided to put this slide together. We actually have used this with a couple of partners, and these hours are rough numbers, right? This is not an end-all, be-all. This is just what we've heard on average, and I want to make a couple of areas of this clear. So the first thing you got to do is you got to review and study the blueprint and the handbook. Let me say that again. Review and study the blueprint and the handbook. Most every question I get around the process, and Joe gets and Matt gets, is answered via the handbook and the blueprint. Read it. Read it again, and then read it a third time. It really is important because the blueprint is what drives the requirements for your defense and the areas that you need to cover with your design and during your defense. So it's really, really important. Take the 2 to 5 hours and read all that material. Once you've read all that and you understand what needs to go into your package, you can then start to prepare and submit your application and the design package. So the application itself is multiple pages. There's pieces of the application that you're going to cut and paste from your actual design. You got to put your design package together with all your documents. We don't provide templates for the document package. That's up to each individual candidate to decide what they want their template to look like. Then you submit that. And this sounds really simple, but I've had to answer this question. Your application has to be accepted. This is like applying for a job. Just because you've sent in the application doesn't mean you're invited to defend. It's not a guarantee of defense. It goes through a couple of pre-review processes where it's examined for completeness, that the application is complete, and it's handed off to a panelist to actually do an in-depth review on, and then it's decided whether that candidate is invited or not. So at that point is when you would actually be invited to defend. And then we have on the books now an optional defense prep training class that we offer the week before a set of defenses. It's actually run by the education team and Linus Bork and the instructors, where it's a 3-day class where it doesn't go through changes to your design, but it helps you prepare mentally, physically, not really physically, but mentally for the defense and some of the questions you might get. And then it's up to you to sort of practice and prepare for your interview, and then ultimately fly out and attend a defense. So understand there's a lot of work that goes into this. So if you're not ready to submit for April, but you might be ready to submit for October, then you want to start this process now. There's a lot of people that are already in this process. So with that, we also get the question of, what makes a successful VCDX candidate? So I went out to a bunch of the VCDXs and I said, tell me, what the DNA is that you see people come through the defense and having been through it myself. And this is some of the stuff we came up with. What we see is people with real-world experience in doing designs and architecting and implementations for customers tend to do really well at certain parts of the defense, especially the troubleshooting and the design defense. There's something to be said for having customer interaction. When you work directly with customers, you have presentation skills. You have some of these skills that you need to do well at the defense. Successful candidates don't ask what needs to be done. They actually figure out the solution. I'll give an example of some things that we sometimes hear during a defense when a candidate acts, and we'll get to this in the do's and don'ts as well. Sometimes a candidate will respond to a question with a question, as if, is my answer correct? Most candidates are very, very confident, and I've kind of got that down in the traits, right? I won't read through all of these, but, my personal opinion on some of these is that, some of the best people that come through are extremely confident and adaptable. That's one of my favorites. There's a difference between being cocky and confident, but people who are confident in their design, they stand by their decisions, they understand why the decisions were made, they don't waver in the face of being asked about that decision, right? So a lot of times what happens is, you get asked a question about a decision you made, and you panic, and you get really nervous. And you second guess the decision that you made. If it was the right decision and it was a justifiable decision, then so be it. It's a justifiable decision. Some of the other ones that I think are really important traits is the critical thinking piece. This isn't about yes or no answers to the questions. It's about really absorbing the question asked of you and then thinking about the answer. And I think the self-motivated piece stands on its own. If you're not real self-motivated to do all this work and do all the application pieces, it's going to be it's going to be hard for you to complete it. So think about some of these traits. And the reason these are on here is VCDX is not necessarily for everyone. If you don't have some of these things, that's perfectly okay. It means that maybe the VCDX level isn't for you, or you've been through it a couple of times, and now you're looking at this list and you're wondering, okay, maybe I don't fall into a lot of these things. Maybe that's why you've struggled. It doesn't mean you can't try again. What it means is you have to get better at some of these traits, right? If you look at this list and you say, wow, I'm not really very customer focused, not meaning that you don't like your customers, but you're more of an administrator, you don't get in front of customers, you don't present a lot, you have to get outside of your box and you have to go do that. Duncan Epping, colleague of mine, friend, past mentor to me, just in VMware and in the blogging space, wrote an article a couple weeks ago that said, if you don't have a particular skill, go out and get it. Go out and do it. Go out and actually perform that job role or that function so that you can learn it. Some of these things you just can't do or go read a book and understand how to be, a really good presenter in front of a group of people. So that's where the continuous learning piece is. You've always got to be continually adapting. So when you listen to this replay or you look at this again, you'll see this slide over and over again as we do the live presentations as well. I think this was a good add-in to this workshop program. So we get the question a lot around multiple attainment. Now this is where it's going to get a little bit confusing. There's a couple of asterisks in here around proposed changes that haven't been implemented 100% yet. Some of these we are actually going to be doing as of this round. So really simply put, if you are a VCDX data center virtualization, desktop or cloud, and I apologize, I didn't get a chance to update the acronyms on these, or you're a VCDX NV that was VMware focused, and there's an asterisk on that because that doesn't exist yet, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. So let's focus on the first three. If you're a VCDX data center, desktop, or cloud, and you want to submit for any other VCDX, you simply have to submit a design. The designs are submitted at the same time as any other defense at this time. We are looking at having doubles and triples and multiples essentially submitted on a different cadence. Carl and I have been talking about that, but it hasn't come to fruition yet because you don't have to redefend. So with the exception of, I'll talk about that in the next slide. So all of these you would simply submit and not have to redefend. So if you're a DCV today and you're submitting for cloud with this waiver, you'll submit your design and there is no redefense. There is, however, this phone interview, and we are going to be implementing that with this round of April submissions. And all that is this is a good thing. We got feedback from Matt and some other folks that when we do the double submissions, it's a piece of paper. You get this application from a candidate. and you read it at face value. And sometimes it's really clear whether the design is good and it passes, the muster, so to speak, to give the person a double. Sometimes it's really clear on the other side of the fence, right? The black and white of it's good or it's a good quality design or it's not a good quality design stands on its own. It's the middle space. It's the gray area that we've had candidates, submit stuff, and the panelists have said, if I only had a half hour or 60 minutes to just schedule a phone call with this person, I could get one or two questions answered in that gray area that would make it perfectly clear then which side of the fence it falls on. So this is a good thing. We've actually decided to do this for this round. So some folks who do submit for doubles may get a phone call request or a request for a meeting with their reviewer, and just understand it's actually going to give you more of an opportunity to get your double and get your next VCDX through that submission, so that those open questions the reviewer may have can get answered. So I think that's huge. This is a completely new concept for the program, so we're excited to actually do that. Once you actually the double goes through that process, it's either deemed to pass or fail without the defense, and then you would get your next VCDX. So that path is pretty easy and pretty understandable. With the release of VCDX NV, we haven't implemented this proposed change, and I'm going to talk about the actual declaration process on the next slide. So today, anybody who's a VCDX NV only, who's actually already got their VCDX NV and it's the only VCDX they have, if you want to submit for cloud, desktop, or data center virtualization, you actually do have to redefend. That was actually rolled out when the previous folks were running the program. And the reason for that, and I'll give a little background, the reason for that and why we don't do it on the other ones is with desktop and cloud, there's enough things in the blueprint. If you read the desktop and the cloud blueprints, there's a fair amount of vSphere-centric items in that blueprint that have to be presented as part of your design. In the current NV blueprint, it's a little bit lighter on some of those vSphere-centric technologies. So in a sense, it's not aligned the same as desktop and cloud, where we feel if you go through a cloud defense, you go through a desktop defense, we've tested you on enough vSphere knowledge that if you wanted to submit a design for data center virtualization, we're not going to ask you to redefend. However, you haven't defended specifically enough data center virtualization in depth to be automatically granted a second VCDX. So what we're actually going to try to do to solve this problem, because this is what has to happen today. Anybody who submits today for desktop or cloud under the current VCDX NV has to redefend, is this proposed declaration process. This is something Carl and I are actively working on for at some point in 2015. We haven't determined if we'll make it in for April or not. I'm guessing probably not now. Because it's only a couple weeks away, but maybe for the October defenses, is what we're going to do is we're going to slightly tweak the application. And in the application, we're going to ask the person submitting for NV if their design is more VMware-centric or more open-source-centric. By doing that, we'll have two different blueprints. We'll have the current blueprint, which won't change, which will be sort of the less VMware-centric blueprint, and we're going to create a new blueprint that mirrors a little bit more what desktop and cloud is, where we cover some more vSphere technologies. By doing that and declaring more VMware-centric versus not, there are folks that want to do open source NV and never do any other VCDX at all. They just want their networking one. They're completely covered. They can go through that path and they can do open source and they can do multi-hypervisor and all that stuff. Folks that are VMware-centric that haven't gone down a VCDX path that say want to do NV first, they would be treated the same as a desktop or a cloud person, right? It's another vSphere-centric path where we cover enough vSphere material in the blueprint and in the defense that then you would be able to submit a second VCDX without redefending. So right now, until that comes out, anybody who gets an NV would have to redefend until that switch sort of flips and we have the declaration piece. So we'll have to track, it's on Carl's plate to track all of the current NVs. So when they submit for a double, we'll know did they fall in the previous realm where they would have to redefend, or did they actually submit an application that had the declaration on it. Again, this is completely new. It's something we've got to do to adapt to the doubles process and try to make things a little bit, I don't want to use the term easier to get your double, but make it a little smoother. for folks that want to go for multiple VCDXs and go to their double, their triple, and then their elite status, which would be having all four. So keep that in mind. Keep some eyes out for that. This is another improvement we're trying to make. So one of the things I get asked on a regular basis is if I'm starting out from scratch, and I wanted to get all four, how would I go about doing it? What's one of the paths of least resistance? And understand this is just my opinion only. I put this out there at PEX, and Matt and I had some discussions about it. And from a context, let me put it in context. The context being you're going 0 to 4, right? You know your goal. You've set a goal that you want to have all four VCDXs, and you don't have one yet. So which one do you start with, and then how do you progress to get the other one? So that's the context of this. And one of the thoughts that I had was start with data center virtualization, right? Start with the core, fundamental, foundational VCDX, and build your environment out and your design out to fit a data center virtualization defense. And defend on DCV, right? Because you've always got to defend on your first one. Once you've defended on DCV, the premise of some of these other solutions and some of these other tracks is that they can all stem from vSphere and a core data center virtualization design. So you could go out and build an EUC layer to your original design. You could then potentially bolt on some cloud management and automation with vRealize automation on top of that vSphere design to turn it into a cloud design. You could then add in network virtualization components and then submit a network virtualization design. It's a concept, right? It's a way to think about, if you knew you wanted to get 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 and you haven't started yet, to really think about the starting point, right? And treat the others as sort of a bolt-on to it. And to me, this is sort of a logical approach, right? And that's the way my brain works. I think path of least resistance, right? So if I'm going to do one defense, let's say I defended on cloud, how do I then turn a cloud one into more of a data center virtualization one? What components were left out, as opposed to going the other way around? The way VMware technologies have always been built is they've always been built off of vSphere. vSphere has always been the foundation. So why not start there and then add everything else into it? This usually, when we do the live ones, this turns into a great discussion point. So ask some questions about this in the Q&A window. But if there's a time period to this too, if you take too long to do this, versions could change and things like that. So you do have to maybe think about this going into it. But I personally wouldn't want to do 4 completely different designs from scratch. That's an awful lot of work. But that's just me. So keep that in mind, and that's something you can play with or think about. All right. So let's talk a little bit about when we're doing these defenses, what are we looking for? What demonstrates design expertise? And we'll talk about some tips and tricks, and we'll get into some of the fun stuff. So what really demonstrates design expertise? This is what the major things that we think a candidate needs to show, right? And I won't read through all of these, but some of these is understanding impact of choice, right? I think this is a huge one, and this is an everyday item to me. I'll give a real life example. VMware decided to retire those VCap exams. What was the impact of that choice? There's a huge impact of that choice, right? There was an impact of that choice to the community. There was an impact of that choice to the VCDX program itself upstream. So how did we then deal with that impact? What was our remediation plan? I mean, you can apply VCDX layers of thinking to just about any decision that you deal with in business, and that's just one example. We look for different constraints and risks. So if you don't notice, I throw out the constraint thing a lot on Twitter. When people ask why isn't there a live VMUG everywhere around the world, it's a constraint of budget, right? It's really, really simple. We have to work around that constraint. So we have things like this online one. That's our remediation for that constraint, or our way around that constraint. And what are some of our risks around the designs? Primarily, the big one, which is at the top, is understanding the business requirements, because the business requirements from the customer business requirements will drive a lot of these other things. They're going to drive the decisions. The constraints are going to drive the decisions. The risks are going to drive the decisions. all of these things roll into what I like to call critical thinking around the design. It's not it's not a check boxes of yes or no's and a task list that you walk down. That really is what demonstrates design expertise, the ability to walk through all these different things and sort of play the chess game in your own mind as far as how one decision is going to impact another. And sometimes certain decisions have impacts on other decisions, which then have an impact on a constraint or a risk. It becomes a vicious circle. So you want to be able to provide that complete solution that really does in the best way it can address all of the requirements, the constraints, and the risks that the customer set forth. And then you're going to be asked to answer all the questions about your design and defend the decisions. And really, we'll talk about the time management. You're going to have to manage your time very, very effectively in the defense, and we'll talk about the structure of that if you're not familiar with it. So what demonstrates a lack of design expertise, on the opposite side of the spectrum? Well, delivery from templates. This is one of the reasons why we don't provide templates. We want to see people's creativity. We want to see how people come up with their own package on their own. If we just handed everybody a template, then it wouldn't really be unique to each candidate. If you can't really articulate your strategies and logically defend a lot of the questions that you're asked, if when you get asked a question, if you answer the question with a question as if you're asking for whether your decision was right or not, you're never going to get that from a panelist, right? So that doesn't demonstrate the ability to logically defend questions just by answering questions with a question. When it gets to the design scenario and the troubleshooting, not being able to start that design process, we'll talk about that in depth when we go through it. And from troubleshooting perspective in that area, not being able to identify potential design or implementation issues. So how do you select a design? And there was another slide I was going to put in here, and I'll talk about it at this point, and I'll add it in for the next one. I woke up this morning and thought about it, but forgot to get it in there before we had the session. So you want to really submit a design that meets a bunch of these different criteria, right? You want something that's suited for mission-critical applications. You want it to be unique. You want it to be interesting to talk about. There's a line where a design becomes too complex versus where it's too simple. So you want to find something that has some interesting talking points. It has some interesting business requirements that drove interesting decisions. When it comes to sharing designs, and this is the slide that I'll get put in for the next time, we recommend, when I say we, Carl and I and some of the panelists, are starting to recommend to people definitely work on designs together. A lot of times designs are submitted that are worked on by multiple people. I wrote a blog post about this, and I'll add the highlights to it in a slide. The trick is you are not defending as a team, right? So when you do it with other people, each person has to stand on their own alone in front of the panel. So you have to know every aspect of each participant has to know every aspect of the design inside and out as if it was theirs. The other recommendation and big recommendation we have is try not to work on designs with more than two people. And this is something we've seen in the past, and there's a couple of reasons behind it. If 6 people all submit the same design and it goes to the review stage and it's deemed not invitable, right? We don't decide to invite the candidate. We're not inviting 6 candidates, right? So by submitting a design with that many people on it, you end up having 6 people who don't defend as opposed to 6 people who do defend. When you do it in pairs, all the eggs in one basket becomes a little smaller. The other reason that I like to suggest this is it's easier to make sure that you know the design if you're only working on it with one other person. If 6 or 7 people are working on it, you may not be able to pull all of the information from all 7 of those people so that when you go in and defend, you're confident in all areas of the design. If you're working on it with one other person, you're putting in an equal 50-50 effort into it, and it sort of eliminates the person, any one person of the team riding the coattails. So we definitely encourage people to work on designs, together. I'm actually probably going to be submitting a cloud design for later this year from a previous one that I did with another person in PSO at the time when I was working with them. So we're going to partner up on it. We'll probably submit, a joint design, and we'll let Carl know. We've already let Carl know that we're submitting it jointly. So the biggest thing too is find things that make the design interesting. We've had some designs come through that are just, they have some really quirky requirements and some really cool things, and at the end of the day, yes, you get questions on those, but it makes for a really interesting hour and a half of discussion, and that's what you want this to be. You want this to be a back and forth discussion with the panel, not just you don't want to view this as being grilled question by question. So this is a little more in depth to that first high level process. Because I wanted to drill down into this a little bit. After you submit your application, this sort of breaks down the submission part. We start to determine whether it's complete initially. If there's pieces and parts missing, it gets rejected automatically. If there's areas of the application that are left blank, it gets rejected. Not until that it gets through that initial quick pass do you actually pay your fees, and then we start doing the technical review on it. And then you've got to make sure you credit others. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in this slide around the things you want to have at the application stage. Really, during the defense, once you're defending, do you understand the design? Can you explain the pros and cons, the trade-offs? Does your technical understanding match what you submitted? Sometimes there's gaps. We've seen people submit a design, and then there's a gigantic gap between what they submitted and what they actually say during the defense. So there's a discrepancy there, which usually discrepancies are never a good thing. It makes people question whether you actually did the design or the design. So going back to that, what makes a good design and what makes a good DNA of a candidate? Real world implementations, things you actually worked on yourself that you implemented. Your own design. If you did it, you know it, right? It's kind of like your own baby, your own child. You've sort of nurtured it and raised it from the beginning, so you know every in and out of that design from start to finish. And when you're borrowing other people's stuff or you're making up 80% of it, it becomes tougher than having regular, real customer requirements. So once you pass, you become a VCDX. If you don't, I don't like to say you fail. You didn't fail, and I want to actually change that on the slide. I meant to after PEX. You simply didn't succeed at your first attempt or your second attempt or your third attempt. It doesn't mean that you failed. Failure is something very, very different. Most people who didn't pass their first attempt or their second attempt have always said, or they've written in their blog posts, that they still learned a lot through the experience. They learned a lot about themselves. They learned a lot about the process. Anytime you can say you learned something through a process or through something you were doing, you did not fail. Period, end of paragraph. So I will change that. Matt, remind me. I was supposed to do it after PEX, and I forgot. So some of your application components, this is really at a high level. You've got your completed application form. You've got a signed statement of conduct that comes in. You've got to have your architectural design, your installation guide, your implementation plans, testing plans, operating procedures, your registration fees. This is all stuff that's in the blueprint, right? So you want to make sure that you read the blueprint, because each one's a little bit different. They all cover these 5 basic areas, but in some cases there's a little more detail around each of them for the different tracks. Make sure your submission is free of technical inconsistencies. If it has different things because it was a copy and paste error between the implementation guide and the test plan, that's going to get picked up on. So you want to make sure that it's consistent throughout, that something that's stated in the implementation plan or the installation guide is also the same in the testing plan. It's very easy to get cut and paste happy or copy and paste happy between some of these things and realize that you don't have, that things aren't being consistent. So just make sure that you are checking it for consistency. We'll talk about how you can have peer reviews done in a little bit, but that's another way to make sure that things are consistent, is just have somebody review it. Have one of your peers review it. So when you walk into Defense Day, what does it look like? It's a very scary, crazy thing. No, it's really not. There's a waiting area. We'll get into the logistics of this thing. So once interview day comes, anybody who's approved to defend, there's an on-site meeting with a panel of VCDXs, and this is basically what we go through in that time period. So The defense itself is 75 minutes, so you'll deliver a short 10-minute presentation that introduces your design. You'll start to answer questions from the panelists. This is specifically about the design you submitted. The 3-day defense prep class focuses a lot on this part of the defense in preparing you for some of the questions you may get asked, helping build your confidence level, helping you, be ready to sort of answer some of those things about your design. So a good chunk of that 3-day prep class is spent, on this section of that defense day, of the 3 parts. So for a couple of these, for some of the defenses, it's a little bit longer. I thought that was actually in here. I'll have to go. It might be in another slide for desktop and cloud. The defense is the same. It's the scenarios that vary. So the design scenario, and we may actually be changing the name of this from design scenario to customer design interview or something. One of the things we find is when you go from step 1 to step 2, during step 1, the 3 people on the panel, they are VCDXs evaluating your design and asking you questions about it at a technical level and a business level and all these other things. When you walk out of the room after the break or before the break and you come back in after the 15-minute break, you're now into a design scenario. The 3 people on the other side of the table are no longer VCDXs. They're a customer. And that's very, very important because we've seen people come into the next section and make a lot of assumptions during their design scenario because of the personalities and the people on the other side of the table. They're assuming that they know about certain stuff. So my best advice to you is they're customers. They don't necessarily know some of the things you might be talking about. And they'll ask you things. And usually about 10 or 15 minutes in is when some candidates realize that, oh yeah, right, they're not VCDXs now. Right, they're pretending to be customers. It's a role play. So during the DCV typo there, and the NV, that's 30 minutes for the design scenario. So it's a very short period of time. So you've got a very limited amount of time to get some questions in and understand what the customer's asking for. And then during the cloud management and the desktop, they're 45 minutes. Those times we are looking at adjusting down a little bit. We found that for the cloud and the desktop, they've gone a little bit long. So, those we reserve the right to sort of tweak those a little bit. But the sections themselves will always stay the same. There'll always be a design scenario, and we'll always inform a candidate or the community if we decide to change it, because this is pretty well publicized. So, you want to demonstrate that you can begin and work through, a design in a methodical manner. You don't have to come up with a complete design, but you are expected to think out loud and do some other things that we'll talk about. On the troubleshooting scenario, same thing. You get 15 minutes for data center virtualization and network virtualization. I apologize again for the typo. Both Joe and I didn't pick up on this when we reviewed the deck, so we'll go through it again. And desktop is 30 minutes. Again, we're looking at adjusting those times. And you don't have to solve the problem. You don't get a prize for solving the problem. You don't get really anything for solving the problem. It's about your thought process and understanding how you actually think through troubleshooting. So what does the format look like? When you walk into the room, there will be 3 panelists that are all the VCDX certified panelists. They will interact with you and they will record the scores. There will be 1 facilitator who makes sure that the rules and the timelines are adhered to. They collect backpacks and phones and everything, laptops. The only thing you're allowed to bring in is a USB key. A lot of times there will be 1 or more observers. This program is growing, so the way we get more panelists is we train them by making them an observer, and they actually do observation scores. So they actually can't ask you questions, but they are recording their questions. They're writing notes down. They're actually doing some of the scoring on their own, and then that scoring is compared to the real panelists. And when we feel that they've sort of gotten in line with the existing panelists as far as some of the questions they would have asked that they wrote down in their notes, then we actually flip them over to a panelist. We need to train people, right? We don't just drop somebody into a panelist. So understand the observers are there to help scale the program because observers will always become panelists. The whiteboard there's a room with a whiteboard, usually 1 projector. We provide the presentation laptop. You can't bring in yours or your PDAs. And then there'll be a timer that only pauses between sections. It doesn't stop ever. It keeps going. So, you have to manage your time and you have to be aware of that. And we'll give you certain time markers too. We'll tell you when there's 5 minutes, when there's 30 minutes, things like that. So what are we sort of looking for when we go through your logical to physical design? You want to really make sure, especially in the design defense, that you're collecting or the design scenario, that you're collecting customer requirements and constraints, and we'll talk about listening skills in a little bit. You want to map a lot of this stuff into different areas as far as security and recoverability and performance. As you're thinking through some of this, when it's specific to the scenario, you want to try to create a solution based on some of those mappings. It doesn't have to be all the mappings. You don't have to use everything, but you want to really start to talk about how you would start building this, this out as you go. So you want to try to map components and entities into the logical design. You want to try to look at the virtual machine mappings, the compute resources, the storage. This is not gospel, right? This is just an idea that you can use if it helps you. If you have another way of going from logical to physical, by all means use it. This is not something that if you don't put a box up on the whiteboard that says storage resources and put another box that says compute resources, it's not going to hurt you or help you. It's all in what works best for you. The idea is that you have to go from logical to physical. You have to think about the customer requirements, think about logical, and then move into some physical requirements. A lot of times people jump right into the physical, and they don't really talk about the logical side. You need to do both, especially in the design scenario. That design scenario portion is really where you're thinking on your feet, and you're really asked to go right off the cuff. You don't get any pre-information, and we'll cover that. So we'll start. We'll intermingle some tips in here as you go. So before before your session, before you walk in to your defense, or even before you start this whole process, commit to yourself. You got to really set your mind right and start to budget your prep time and how you're going to go about working on this and getting it all done. Most people don't have enough hours in the day to deal with family and work, and then piling this on top of it. So it does take a commitment. It's like anything else, like going to night school, or I can vouch for that. I started working in IT without a degree, and I went back to school at night and was managing a house. This was back in 2010. I was building a house back then. I was living in my parents' basement. We had a new dog. I just got married. I was working, and I was going to night school, to try to better myself. So it's not something you just sign up to do and then hope that it happens, right? So there's some minimum time to think about the application and some of the documentation. This is not including the design itself. Usually those designs have been done over multiple hours. They've been done at real customer sites. There's been modifications, additions, things that have to keep getting tweaked to it. There's a lot of study groups out there. We'll talk about this in a couple other slides, but if you haven't formed one or you don't know about one, get out on Twitter and find out where there is one. It's a great way for your designs to get reviewed for consistency so that you're not missing anything. Make sure that you know your design inside and out. Don't submit it and then not look at it again until defense day. You want to really be continually understanding the areas of it so that you're not going to be able to flip through pages and pages and pages of documentation when you get asked a question, right? You're going to need to know some of this stuff off the top of your head. You don't need to memorize the whole thing, but you want to know the highlights. You want to know the areas that you want to touch on, that you really want to talk about, that you want to drive some of the conversation with, and then as you get asked questions, you're going to have to think back and kind of know it. And again, I'll give you a perspective from my defense. When I did mine, I did my own design, so I knew it really, really well. I spent 8 months working with that customer on that particular design, so it wasn't too hard for me to sort of think back and remember some of the conversations. So you want to use your time as wisely as possible. You don't want to get bogged down in one area talking about, a lot of people are comfortable in one particular technology and they spend a lot of time talking about that and they don't hit the other areas of the blueprint. I can't stress this enough. Talk and talking and thinking out loud when it comes to the design scenario specifically. Don't just stand there. Ask questions, listen to the answers, write some stuff down. Use diagrams. If you don't use the whiteboard, don't be afraid of it. It's there to help you. If you feel that you can get your point across better by drawing a picture with 3 or 4 boxes on it and some squiggly lines, draw the 3 or 4 boxes and the squiggly lines and then explain what it is. Right? A lot of times people struggle with communication, and there's some other stuff I neglected to add in here around some of the key communication skills, but some of your communication skills you may have to work on, whether it's your verbal, your nonverbal, your visual. So I consider the whiteboard visual communication, right? I don't consider it written communication because it's not documentation based, right? Your written communication is what's in your design package. But if you can do it visually better, I talk with my hands a lot. I'm doing it right now. I'm on the phone, and if I was on video, you'd see me flailing around. But use what's comfortable for you. If diagrams are going to make it better, do it. By all means, don't be afraid of the whiteboard. Some other things that you definitely want to do, you want to treat this like any other customer interaction. Be natural. Do what's comfortable for you. You're walking in and talking to customers. You do this all the time, right? Be confident. Don't try to be somebody else. Don't try to pretend to be somebody you're not. It just makes it harder for you. Be who you are. Make sure you structure your thoughts. You want to make sense. You want to talk with a certain flow as if you're giving any kind of presentation. You got to be succinct in explanation. You got to be quick, not quick, but you've got to be to the point and short, and make sure that you get your point across without struggling over different aspects of what you want to say. So you want to definitely keep things clear and to the point. Definitely we've said that, we can't say this enough, have others review your design, but think critically about your design and some of the things you want to ask about. I'll touch on the English piece. We get a lot of requests around doing defenses in other languages. Today, all defenses are done in English. The reason for that is we don't have a pool of panelists big enough in various languages to hold an entire defense panel with 3 people in a particular language. As the program grows and more employees become panelists, we may very well have a Chinese panel, and we'll do it all in Chinese. The documentation would probably still be submitted in English, and the application would be in English, but we would be able to potentially hold the physical defense in Chinese. So that is something we're trying to work towards. We don't have the list of languages yet, but know that it is in English. And what I've moderated, and when I moderate, I ask before we get going on a particular section, I'll ask the candidate, if there's any clarification they need, if they're not, if their first language isn't English, so that we don't, before we start the timer. So we try to be sensitive to that, so we're not trying to put people at a disadvantage. So some things not to do. This is my favorite section. This is a short list. If it's on this list, it's actually happened. I think Matt and I could make a whole slide on some of this stuff, but don't bring posters. You can't bring any of that stuff in. You can't have props, no bells and whistles and whirlybirds and noisemakers or anything like that. Don't bring the panelist gifts. That's a bad idea anytime. It's not going to be allowed, so don't even think about it. But again, it has happened. Try not to name drop. The people on the other side of the table, I've said this in every one of these that I've done. They're human beings just like you. They've gone through the same process that you're going through. They have as much respect for you walking through that door as you may have for them on the other side of the table because you know who they are. It's a two-way street. There's no reason to fall over your feet based on who's on the other side of the panel, get nervous about who's on the other side of the table. They put their pants on one leg at a time just like you do. They got up in the morning and they brushed their teeth and came to work. So there's really no reason to, do things like that. It's just going to make yourself more uncomfortable if it's a nervous tick or something like that. You don't have to. And when you're talking about your design, you can, I don't want to say don't quote blogs, but if that was one of your sources, you could certainly name that as one of your sources. What you don't want to do is say, I did it because so-and-so blogged about it. Or I did it because it was best practice, right? That's always a no-no. You want to know why it was the best practice. So there's a fine line there between quoting blogs and crediting, maybe a blog that you used around a particular design setup or something like that. So that's sort of a gray area. The idea is to it's you and your design and the three panelists on the other side of the table. So let's talk a little bit about study sessions, mock defenses, mentoring, community type stuff, all these things that are out there to help you succeed. So if you want to do study sessions, identify other candidates. I think that everybody hashtags Twitter with VCDX, so if people are putting together study sessions and there's blog posts about study sessions, you can always find them on social media. When you do design sessions, our recommendation is focus on the design content and the defense and the scenarios themselves. So review, designs, review each other's designs for alignment to the blueprint, right? Because that's the key. If it's aligned with the blueprint, it's probably pretty complete. If there's missing pieces in the blueprint versus what the blueprint has, you're probably going to run into issues. You want to examine each other's designs for consistency. Consistency is key when it comes to some of this stuff. Do some Q&A on design areas. However, don't just beat each other up on technical aspects, right? Ask critical questions and answer with critical thought. And this is something we train the panelists to do. And there's been some pluses and minuses about this, but it's one of the reasons why panelists are not mentors, or they're not able to mentor people on a specific design. They can help out with process guidance and architectural stuff in general, but if they were to actually ask you questions on your design, they'd be asking you questions the way they've been trained to ask questions in a defense. That would put some people at an advantage over others, and that's one of the reasons why we don't do that. So think about how you want to ask questions. Some of the advice we give is don't ask yes or no questions about a design. Ask, why a particular thing was. Why did you make that particular decision? Was there, I don't see a requirement. Tell me a little bit more about the requirement that drove that. I don't see anything specific in here, or things like that, so that it forces the person to think about their answer. When you have to answer yes or no, there's really no thought to it, right? So that's one of the reasons why you want to do these study sessions and mock defenses. We're going to give you some slides in here that you could use to simulate the scenarios, and these are actually posted, I think, on the VCDX site with the with the old version of the PowerPoint. So it's always a good idea to do some study sessions. If you do mock defenses, use a similar environment. Doesn't have to be exact, but use a whiteboard and a projector. If you want to practice your timing, around some of this stuff, then by all means, have a 75-minute timer. If you can have 3 people pretend to be panelists, then by all means do so. And I was ahead of myself, but I already hit this bullet. Don't hammer technology. Force the person to think critically. Yes and no answers are not considered critical thinking. If you've never heard the term critical thinking, Google it. It's actually very, very well known in a lot of areas. It's the ability to actually listen, absorb, internalize, and then respond with an answer, as opposed to just blurting out answers off the cuff. So it's something that I actually learned through my night school, believe it or not. You will not get time extensions ever. The clock will never stop. I suppose, Carl, if somebody has like a health-related event or something, we would probably stop the clock. That's yet to happen, though, I think, so far. Nobody's actually walked in the room and gone into cardiac arrest or had an aneurysm or anything from the stress. Hopefully, knock on wood, that never happens. So I suppose there is probably some minor, not minor, there's probably some major areas where we would stop the clock and not have the defense. But and in general circumstances, it's just going to keep rolling. So, and make sure somebody actually plays moderator just to keep the time in check. So let's talk a little bit about mentoring. So with the new directory, vcdx.vmware.com, there's a filter option to filter on people who have volunteered as being mentors. And it's up to each individual VCDX can tag themselves as a mentor. We actually don't control it. The only thing the program controls is their entry into that database. We actually put in their first name, their last name, their email address, and the VCDX they earned. Everything else on that directory is self-serviced by the individual. So if they've tagged themselves as a mentor, they've decided to volunteer as a mentor. It is up to you. This is the self-motivated trait that I talked about at the beginning. You're not going to be assigned a mentor. It's up to you to go decide who you think you fit best with and who you think you can work with and who can help you and teach you throughout the process. So, and it's a very personal connection, right? You know, some of the mentors I've had in the past are still very good, close friends of mine. I was mentored by a gentleman up in New Hampshire who's a very big entrepreneur, and you know, we still talk on a regular basis. So there's things that happen through mentoring, and what we've done is we've provided some basic rules of engagement. They're on the mentoring VMTN page. There's also a more in-depth document that actually has some links to for people who want to be mentors to learn more about mentoring, because it's not just a sign up and do it sort of thing. So what we've already talked about panelists can't specifically review your design submission or sit on mock panels. What they can do is they can do the general architectural questions. They can give process guidance. They can help you decide, you know, should I do NV? Should I do, you know, cloud first? You know, this is where I'm sitting. Just can you give me some guidance on that? That is considered general guidance that any VCDX, whether they're a panelist or not, can do. What you simply can't ask them to do and what they'll refuse to do based on the current panelist code of conduct is specifically review your package, your application, and sit on a mock panel for you. Sometimes panelists still even recuse themselves from your defense if they know you well enough. So even if they haven't mentored you or anything, they will still be asked to recuse themselves from being on your panel. So what any mentor should be doing, in general, this is very high level, they should continue to help you with the overall process. They should help you develop communication skills. They should be making sure that your stuff is complete, that you don't have any specific questions around, you know, areas in the does it match the blueprint? What they shouldn't be doing as a mentor is helping you build the design. They shouldn't be doing the work for you by any means. They shouldn't be removing or adding specifics to the design. You know, they should be suggesting areas where it's maybe light and letting you go off and critically think about what might be missing and then come back to them with some of the pieces added in. And you can find a lot of these people, again, on Twitter using the hashtag VCDX. So I keep a Twitter stream, search stream up on VCDX, column up in TweetDeck all day long. So if this is something you're serious about and you're committing to, you want to get plugged in. So if you want to set up and simulate a defense, this is kind of what it looks like. We actually gave you the URL for the timer that we use, and that timer is for the 75, 30, and 15 minute. It doesn't actually work. We do a manual timer for the extra time on the other scenarios for cloud and desktop. Set up a moderator, 3 panelists, some water, candidate, and then a projector and a whiteboard. So it's pretty basic to set these up. A couple partners actually do some of these at events, which is great. They actually get the room and they set it up similarly. So it gives you an opportunity to kind of get in front of some people, the week of the defenses. That would be in addition to the prep class. When we run the 3-day prep class the week before, we'll have all this stuff set up. And Linus's team, or Linus Bork and the other trainers, they will play panelists. We're actually going to train them as panelists. So they will, in fact, ask you questions like a panelist would, since it's a VMware class, it's an official class. So we want to make sure that we make it as real as possible. They're just not going to do any scoring. Right, so they're never going to actually do any scoring for you. So let's talk about the design scenario. Before we get into that, though, let's talk about both scenarios, the design scenario and the troubleshooting scenario in general. Right? Remember, you're in a customer role-play situation. The people on the other side of the table have flipped from very well-known, smart VCDXs that know everything about anything to customers. Right? That doesn't mean that they don't know anything. It means that they are now have a project or a problem or something that they're trying to solve, but they don't have the answers, and they don't, at that point, have the knowledge that they have in their head as VCDXs. That's a really big switch you got to flip in your brain. They switch it really easily because they put your design away, And they put on their customer hat, and we give them customer scenarios that they work off of, and they work off of a script, right, for the scenario. It's harder for the candidate to flip that switch and remember that they're now just everyday, customers with a project that you have to go interview and talk to. So I can't stress that enough. Understand what their business goals and use cases are. What problem are they trying to solve? Make sure you identify some of the requirements and constraints that this customer has. Listen to what they're saying. Prioritize and write some of this stuff down. Use a parking lot. This is where the whiteboard comes in great. As you're asking them questions and you're getting pieces of information that you think are going to be relevant to what you do with the scenario as you move forward with a design, write it down, right? That's what the whiteboard is there for. They're going to give you things and information that will relate and impact the certain goals that they might have, and you've got to work within that. They're going to give you constraints, of course. So as you ask questions, clarify gaps, listen to the answers. This sounds really easy. There's a saying that most people who have ever been through a sales training have been taught, and most good sales training classes teach this phrase. God gave you one mouth and two ears for a reason, so you can listen twice as much as you talk. And there's validity into that. We see a lot of people come in that they'll ask a question, the panel will answer the question, and the candidate won't write down the answer or use any piece of that information to create a follow-up question. They just move on to something else. So they clearly weren't necessarily listening to the response, because you need to use some of that information. The information that they give you may lead you to another question or down another path. So you want to make sure that you write that stuff down and you can go back to it at any time. You want to start to diagram a proposed solution for the design. It doesn't have to be a complete diagram of a solution. It's think about this as the first meeting with the customer, right? You're trying to hash out some ideas, trying to gather some requirements, maybe give them a little bit of an idea of what a possible design could look like, but it doesn't have to be a complete, full-blown design. Use the whiteboard. Think out loud. You're going to see this repeated and repeated and repeated, because there's been instances where we've had people never touch the whiteboard in 30 minutes or 45 minutes, or it's how do you get to a design if you're not taking notes or actually using some of your thought process? Would you do that with a real customer? I guess that would be the question I would propose to people. And if you're thinking about this, is if you walked into a regular customer scenario, how many customer meetings have you ever walked into where you never touched the whiteboard, based on them giving you a whole bunch of information and asking you to show them something? We want you to show the panel some level of design. You can't show them anything if you don't draw anything or write it down. So there will be a clock, 30 minutes for DCV and NV. Apparently I got to this slide to update the acronyms. And then 45 minutes for the other two. And here's some of the design specific. So the first slide was in generalities, right? So specific to the design scenario and the format. You're actually going to be given a situation and a scenario, and we're going to walk through one of these, and this is where I'll ask Joe and Matt to sort of unmute and throw in some of their 2 cents. You're going to be the architect in the room, and you're going to be talking to a group of customers, 3 customers, and they tend to have different roles, right? There's no set, panelist 1 is the IT manager, and panelist 2 is a storage guy, right? They tend to adopt the roles as these things change, but, you'll figure out who's who. The focus of this whole thing is the journey, not the destination. And what I mean by that is it's really easy to tell somebody, I'll give you an analogy, it's really easy to say, I would like you to drive from Los Angeles to Boston. It's much harder for you to give them the journey from Los Angeles to Boston and all the steps in between and the places you'd like them to stop and see and the things that they want to go and where they're going to get gas and all these other things, right? That's really what we're looking for, is we're looking for the entire journey, not just the beginning and the end. We want to know how you get from point A to point B. We want to know how you think throughout the process. And this is where some of your presentation skills will come in into play, both your visual and your verbal and your nonverbal and all those things. Make sure that you gather as much information as possible, but don't spend the whole time gathering information. You have 30 minutes. So in your brain, in your mind, set some markers. Maybe you want to ask questions for 15 minutes and then start talking about a potential design. If you ask questions for 29 minutes, you haven't shown a design. All you've done is ask questions. It's really easy for anybody to just fire questions into what I call the shotgun question approach for 30 minutes, but never actually come up with anything. Right? It's not about asking as many questions as you can possibly squeeze into a 30-minute period. It's about asking the right questions to get yourself the right information so that you can start working on a potential design. So you have to have these markers in your brain as far as how long you want to ask questions and how long you want to start designing. And then as you're designing and you're presenting this to the panel, explain why you made a certain decision. I'll give you an example. The panel may say that they need high availability or they have a particular requirement, and you draw up on the board, a 4-host cluster with HA enabled, and they ask you, well, what does HA do? What's HA going to give us? Was HA done because they gave you a requirement for high availability? Did they give you a requirement on high availability for an application within their problem or within their overall architecture? So where does HA fit to that requirement? You got to justify your decision. You can't just say, well, I enable HA on every cluster I do. Right? There's justification. It's always about justifying the decision that you're making, even in that live scenario. If you make an assumption about something that you're just going to drop in, say, SRM because they asked for high availability, did they have a requirement for SRM? Do they have storage-based replication? Do they have a license, or are they running vSphere replication appliance? Do they even know what that is? You've made a huge assumption by just saying you're going to give them SRM. So think about that. You're definitely not expected to complete the design in the time, right? So again, we keep repeating the durations because it's important to know as you're doing your mocks and things like that how much time you have. So a few tips for the design scenario, and you definitely want to sketch your ideas and walk through your topology as you go. You want to take some notes. Always ask, do I have all the information I need? Do I have the right requirements? Do I have the right constraints? In 30 minutes, you're only going to get so much, right? So figure out where you want to start and stop and continue designing. You want to know what the customer strategy is. You want to know what kind of risks they might have and how they're going to mitigate that stuff. Don't just stand there and be silent. Man, I've been on panels and I've been a moderator and I have seen it. I have seen people go into vapor lock in this stage, and we give them the scenario, and I'll show you what an example of a scenario looks like that you'll get. And there's also this other phrase that's in the sales world that is, he who speaks first loses when you're in negotiations, right? It's very difficult for everybody in the room to sit in uncomfortable silence. But I will guarantee you the panelists will not be the first ones to speak, because it's not for them to offer you information. It's for them to answer questions that you're asking. So they will sit there in silence as long as you don't ask any questions. And that becomes really uncomfortable for everybody involved. I don't think any human being likes the uncomfortable silence. But they pretty much will be on the other side of the table biting their lip until you say something. So, we've seen people go 5 minutes without asking anything, and you can read the slides. The slides are still there for you to read, but you don't want to stand there and read them for 5 or 10 minutes, right? You got to get going. So, and I'll show you an example. So the slides I'm going to show you are retired. These are not used anymore. You'll be able to tell by some of the data points in them that they're fairly dated. So as we retire these, we use them in some of these presentations. We really don't update them in this workshop because it's just for context purposes only. So normally in the live one, this is where we have a lot of live customer or candidate interaction. So I'll rely on Joe and Matt to sort of jump in with some of their ideas on this. So normally we do this as a quick role play with folks in the audience, but I'll give you an example of what this would look like. And this is pretty typical. You'll get 2 slides. and you'll get one slide that talks about the customer requirements. And the moderator will actually read this for you. They'll read it out loud, and the clock hasn't started yet. So they'll read the first slide top to bottom. They'll give you all this information, and then they'll read the second slide, which is usually physical environment information, some hardware information, maybe a diagram, things like that. And what will happen is you'll be able to control between the two of these. You can toggle back and forth if there's pieces of information you want to go back and glean through. But you've got to take a quick look at this and maybe jot a couple of notes down as it's being read or it's up on the screen. Once you've read this and once the moderator's read this and gone through all of it, the timer will start. The clock starts ticking from 30 minutes or 45 minutes down. And the goal here is to start to identify some areas within this that you want to walk through. So, Joe, are you unmuted right now? I think you are.
Yeah, I'm here.
Matt, are you dialed in too? Maybe, maybe not. Well, we'll go with Joe then if we have to. So it'll be me and Joe.
He had to dial back in, so he may just be muted.
All right. Sorry, I unmuted myself on here.
Oh, there he is. All right. So everybody meet Matt and Joe. So what I'd like you guys to do is, we won't read through this verbally, but can you both simply give the audience examples as I'll ask Joe to play the candidate and Matt to play the panelist. Throw out some examples, Joe, of the type of questions you would ask as the candidate, and Matt, some of the responses and comments you may give as the panelist, just so that, just let the two of you guys role play a little bit so people can get a feel for what the interaction might be like.
Oh, this should be fun.
And we didn't practice this anyway, so this is exactly how it will be for real.
Okay, so it says right here, starting, what's the big business driver behind this project? What are you looking to do? What are you looking to accomplish? And what's the big thing you want to focus on?
The current thing is to reduce the amount of hardware that we are using and to kind of reduce our total cost of ownership.
Okay, and I see that your budget requires reuse of old hardware. Is there a specific budget for this project, or is it open?
We can get money if we absolutely have to, but we prefer to use all of our old hardware.
Okay. So let's talk about a little bit of the applications that you have in this environment. Databases, web servers. Can you give me a little more information about them? Oh, there we go on the slide.
Sorry, I just took myself off mute. If you want me to go back and forth between the two slides for you, I can.
Okay. Yeah, if you can give me the information on the applications.
The applications are your typical kind of, web app database stuff. Nothing too crazy.
Okay, if you can flop back for me, Chris. I haven't looked at this scenario in a while.
Yeah. You have the slide deck, too.
No, I know, but I didn't actually, look at this slide or look at this particular scenario. All right, so we have to design a cluster for a two-host failure. So can you tell me a little bit why a two-host failure? Why are you looking for N+2?
Well, the business is a little apprehensive. They think that, if we go down to, consolidate onto a certain number of servers, that we're going to have more failures. And also, anytime a server goes down for us, it costs us a lot of money. So we want to be sure we're protected against it.
So now, with the fact that there's a limited budget, what's your actual uptime requirement? Is it 3 nines, 4 nines, 5 nines?
I don't know if we have an exact number, but we're looking probably for the 4 nines.
Okay, so you're looking for 4 nines. Now, what about RTO, RPO from a disaster standpoint?
Well, we're looking at, we have to have things up at least within a half hour. For data loss, probably around an hour or so. Okay.
So from a cost perspective, since we have a very limited budget here, we're not looking to spend any money to be able to reuse this hardware. Is N+2 absolutely required since, we have the RPOs that we have a little wiggle room in there? Can we actually reduce that to say N+1?
N+2 is a requirement.
Okay, is a requirement. Okay. Let's see, use new hardware. So we are going to be procuring some hardware. Is that hardware already purchased, or is that something to be purchased?
We've already bought some hardware. Some you can see it right on the slide here. Some new 2-cord blades.
I see these.
We can add some stuff to it. We just bought 5 of those just because we had some budget to buy some stuff.
Okay, so that's some stuff that's already purchased. But if we need more, we can't purchase more.
If we absolutely have to purchase more, we can. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So it seems that we have a anticipated consolidation ratio of 15-1. So we can use that to actually go through and determine from a hardware requirement how many servers we actually need to go through and build out for this design. If you can flop back over for me, Chris, to see the second one. All right, so we have, and just a note for everyone on the phone, talk out loud when you're doing this, so just to make sure that the panelists can actually see your thought process as you're going through this. So looking at our disk I/O, I see here we have number of servers. We have read and, so 65, 45. Now, is that an average across all servers and all application types, or are there specific servers that go on either side of that equation?
Are you talking about the I/O characteristics?
Yes.
Well, most of the databases are the intensive ones, and it's mostly the other stuff that's balanced.
Okay. And then operating systems here, nothing too out of the ordinary. Now, 2-way dual CPU, kind of looking at what we have. Now, on the left side here, we have these lists of servers. We got 200 servers. Now, those are existing physical servers that are in place, correct?
Yes, those are currently physical servers.
So we want to attempt to reuse that hardware where possible. Is that hardware on the HCL?
As far as I know, yes. Most of them are,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can potentially reuse some of those servers as part of building out this environment along with what you already have existing. Chris, flop back for me again here, too. I want to take a look at the storage that we have in place. All right, so NetApp Fiber Channel SAN is a constraint. Is that a new piece of hardware?
No, that's an existing filer we have.
Okay, can you give me any details in the specs on that?
I can't remember it off the top of my head. I'll have to ask the storage guy. I'll get back to you later.
He's on vacation, right? Let's see. You now select appropriate RAID levels. So now what we need to look at also is part of that storage and trying to get some of the data of what that storage is today. So I'm going to mark that as kind of a follow-up item. You need to be able to understand what that storage is, what it can handle, what we can do with it, because if it doesn't have enough IOPS to handle some of our constraints or some of our requirements here, then we need to make sure that we can add on to that as part of any hardware acquisition. So let's see here. Now, looking at the RAID levels, since you said we did have some database pieces in there, we're going to have to look at, depending on what that storage is, we can look at how the array is currently set up, and then have to go through and make some changes on that. So I'll explain how the process of consolidation and containment will be implemented. Let's talk about that here for a minute. Now, what we can do is go through and build out a set of clusters, be able to migrate this environment into as we're going through in P2V and some of these workloads. Now, I'll ask about the P2V process. Is there a preference in going through and P2Ving this environment or actually going through and actually rebuilding the applications, moving them into the virtual space?
Some of them we can probably build from new, but some of the older ones we don't have developers around anymore, so it'd be advantageous for us to P2V it. Okay,
and that's something that we would definitely want to consider, because sometimes when you do go through a P2V process, you can actually bring some of the problems the servers, the applications may currently have. So if we can rebuild, great. Otherwise, we can P2V. So as we're actually doing that process, whether it's a rebuild, be going through and rebuilding new infrastructure within that environment and start bringing those applications over. On a P2V side, there'll be a process to where we'll actually virtualize that physical system, but then have to go through and make sure we do some cleanup to get it into place, removing various drivers and so on to make sure it'll run properly within the virtual environment.
So let me pause you guys there. I think that's a good place to pause. So really well done. I appreciate it, just because we've got some other slides to get through, including a troubleshooting scenario. So that should give everybody a really good idea and they did this without a whiteboard, right? So Joe was actually doing this and actually explaining some of his thought process, which is what you want to take away from this. So as he was answering a question, he was actually injecting into that answer some of his thoughts as to what he might want to do as part of the design based on the response that he was getting. So I would clap if I had some audio or something, but really well done by both of these guys, as always, because they're both panelists and been through this process. So really quickly, let's look at some of this stuff. These are some of the pre-written things that Joe didn't actually see ahead of time, but what were some of the constraints? The NetApp Fiber Channel Sandwich he actually picked up on was a constraint. He picked up a little bit on the RAID levels, what options are available, what's licensed on that appliance, what kind of protocols do we have? That may not be a RAID level requirement, but he was kind of going down that direction to understand what we had. Why the N+2 piece? Was there capacity planner information, things like that dictated N+2? So he actually hit on that, which was pretty good. Some things for follow-up. We obviously had some storage follow-up because Matt didn't have the information. Eventually getting full details of the new hardware and some of those things. So actually, without having seen the back end of the scenario or these slides here, you guys actually touched on quite a bit of this stuff. So it comes with having done a lot of these. But what are the NIC port speeds? I love that. That's how you know this one's a little bit dated. The existing storage characteristics. Joe asking about the applications and talking about what was going to be running is great. Is a great point, because it's not just about designing the architecture for data center virtualization is not just around existing applications and how they may be oversized. Is there going to be right sizing involved in part of this? Do we actually have I/O metrics for these applications? So talking about the application specifically was a great path to go down. And then he would start eventually talking about what kind of things he'd want to include, from resource servers, management servers, networking, storage, how he would start to integrate all this stuff. So from a data gathering perspective, you actually hit almost all things that were on the slides without even knowing. So great job. So let's talk specifically about the troubleshooting scenario. So this one's a little bit different. It's very short. The time goes by really quick. It's only 15 minutes for DCV and NV. I missed that one there. I got some updates to do. I've already been updating this like every day. And then your desktop and your cloud are still sitting at 30 minutes. This is again a role play, so they will be the same customer, or maybe a different customer, but they're still playing customers. They're going to be talking about a particular problem that they've run into, and they're going to ask you to try to help solve the problem, or at least guide them in the right direction to figuring out the problem. Again, this is about the journey. It's not about the solution. There's no bells that go off when you reach the end of it. If you get the right answer, you're never going to know, because they're not going to tell you. They will not tell you. We actually have people ask us all the time, man, can you tell me what it was? It's driving me nuts. Nope, we're not going to tell you, because we use the scenarios for other people. And it's not about that. So really, if you end your session asking about the answer to the problem, you have to evaluate how you did on the journey, because we don't care about the end of the problem. We don't care about you solving the problem. So you shouldn't care about solving the problem. It's just about thought process. So some tips for the troubleshooting specifically. What are we trying to troubleshoot? There are things in there that are, I don't want to say Easter eggs. They'll never give you information to steer you in the wrong direction, but like any problems exhibit symptoms of multiple things, right? Just because you have a runny nose and a sore throat doesn't mean you have the flu. It means it's a symptom, and that symptom could be 5 or 6 different things. It could be the flu. It could be Ebola. I mean, it could go in 2 different directions, right? So the fever doesn't mean anything. It's what's behind the fever, what's behind the problem. So you got to dig and dig and dig. And the way I explain this to most people is we all do troubleshooting every day. My wife says something's broken, and I go into troubleshooting mode, right? My brain just flips a switch, and I go into what changed, what happened, what's going on, what's the first thing that we got to look at, what's the next thing. I had a leaky pipe in the house the other day, and we were trying to trace that thing down. So it was turning on one faucet at a time, trying to figure out which one it was. And because water finds its own path, so where it was leaking wasn't necessarily directly below the location to where the leak was actually happening, right? Just a real-world analogy. It doesn't have anything to do with technology, but that's how you troubleshoot. That's how you think through the process. So show the different, those are the different avenues, right? Show the path you're trying to take through it. Definitely don't say, ask the panel if you're on the right track. They don't know if you're on the right track. They don't know how to solve the problem. They're asking you for help to the problem. Don't ask around, don't ask them for unimportant information, and we'll talk about that in a second. There's actually one of these things that I'll show. So you're always going to be the architect in this one, and they're still going to be the customer. So what you want to do is you want to write down as much known information as possible. Think about another point to try. Troubleshooting isn't about getting the smoking gun the first time, so you have to kind of rinse and repeat as you go through this. One of the things that you all has been said in past sessions is ask them if they opened up a support ticket and things like that. And to be honest, ask them what you're looking for in the ticket. Say, I'm assuming you maybe got a support ticket open for this. Did you open it on with the application vendor? Did you get any information back from GSS yet specifically? I'm thinking that this is what I'm looking for in the logs. I'm looking for this particular entry or this particular error. Is that something you might have from the support information you already set forth? So I'm going to ask these guys to do. You guys can do this one really quick because we've only got about 20 minutes left, and I want to definitely leave some time for just some Q&A so I can flip over to the Q&A window myself and see what some of it is because I haven't been able to watch it while I'm doing the presentation. So same scenario, you'll get 2 slides. You'll get the background of the problem, and in this case you actually get a diagram of the infrastructure that relates to the problem. And I'd say, Joe, you play the candidate again because you seem to do so well at it. Just maybe spend less than
No, I want to make Matt play. I want to make Matt play the candidate.
All right, we can switch. We can switch, Matt. You okay with that?
Yep.
All right. So no more than 5 minutes on this one because we'll make the time relative to what you spent on the last one, for it being a 15-minute scenario. So just, again, the purpose is to give the audience some idea of the kinds of questions you would ask during trying to troubleshoot this particular problem. So really quick, the issue is some virtual machines are hanging, loss of connectivity to key applications. We can access the host, but sometimes they'll go non-responsive, sporadic slowness. There's some configuration details. So ready, set, go, Matt.
All right. So is this all virtual machines that lose access or just particular ones?
It's just particular ones.
Just particular ones. So is it all users that lose access to the particular ones or just some users?
It's all the users on those particular VMs that are going offline.
Are these VMs on a particular host, or do they exist on multiple hosts?
It's multiple hosts.
Multiple hosts. So if we move the workload from one host to the other, does the problem go away?
Yeah. So when you move it on some hosts, it works, and other hosts, it doesn't.
All right. Is there more? Has there been any changes in the environment recently?
Yeah. Let me check the change logs, and I'll get back to you.
Okay. Can you access the host when the VMs are inaccessible? Does the host itself drop?
No, the host does actually stay online.
Oh, so the host stays online. Okay. Have you opened a support ticket? Sorry, I didn't put that there.
You wise, yeah.
So I got back from the change log. There have been no changes.
There have been no changes? Okay. So does this seem to happen during a particular time of the day, or is it kind of random?
No, it seems to happen at our busiest time during the day.
All right. Are we showing any errors in the logs?
Which logs? Can you be more specific?
The VM kernel log, /var/log on the host.
Yeah, I believe there are some errors in here. Can you tell me exactly what you're looking for?
Are we seeing errors around storage problems, like LUN trespassing?
Yeah, I actually am seeing some. I don't remember if they have fiber channel. Yeah, I am seeing some errors in here with some trespassing problems.
Do you know that there's an active-active or an active-passive array?
I believe you guys had to remind me on that. I'm pretty sure it's active-active.
These guys know this scenario really well because we use this one all the time in the workshop.
Yeah, I'll try to go somewhere else with it. But how are these connected to the network? It says here it's a 10 gig backbone network, but how are the hosts connected to the network?
So it's 10 gig backbone, but all the hosts are actually 1 gig connected to their respective switches.
Are we using a VSS or a VDS or a DVS?
VDS.
Okay. I'm assuming, are all the links redundant?
Yes, they are.
Are all the hosts plugged into the same physical switch?
No, they are going to 2 separate switches, so they're going to redundant switches.
Does the problem seem to exist more on one physical switch or the other, or does it seem to be between the 2?
The problem seems to be on the one switch. There does seem to be one switch where there is having some issues.
Oh, there does seem to be one switch? Okay, so if we move the workloads from one side to the other, the problem goes away?
Yeah, actually it is the problem has gone away at this point.
Okay, are we showing any errors on the switch?
Yeah, there are some spanning tree errors coming up on that switch.
Oh, that's a different scenario.
Okay, we can pause there. I don't know. Joy, I still think you were sweating more than Matt, because you were reaching for some answers on that one. Well,
yeah, I don't remember a lot of the background on that one.
Right. I mean, this is an old one. I think this one was a Lund trespass, to be honest. I think when people see even when we do the live ones, when people see the diagram, it's like a straight up. That's why we retired it, because it was actually too easy of a problem, I think, to solve. But you kind of get the idea, right? So Matt just took it in different directions to try to figure out, where does this problem exist? Where am I trying to dig for it? One suggestion I would have, to folks listening is, as you're doing that, explain why you're looking in that direction. I'm looking at the switches because, I want to make sure that this is. Matt came out with that eventually. He said, I want to know if they're redundant connected or not. So it's always about thinking and explaining and talking out loud. So I think the issues on this one, Matt hit on a lot of these. If we move the VMs from one server to another, does a problem follow the VM or does it follow the host? Are any particular applications on the VM having an issue, or is it the whole VM? Is it the OS? Is it all users or some users? Times when it's more common, right? So the reason you might be asking, you may want to explain, I'm asking, are there times when it's more common because I want to understand when your backup window is, and this is correlating to a backup window or a virus scan, right? The more things you say, besides just asking the question, the more we understand your thought process and why you're asking the question, right? In a lot of cases, if I'm ever on a panel again, I want to know why you're asking the question. Why is it relevant? Why do you think what you're asking is relevant to what you're asking me to look up? Because you're asking me to do work. So why do you want to know, right? So when you do mock panels, that's a good thing to practice, is explaining why you're asking that. So there you can see the Lund trespass piece. That was kind of the dead giveaway. That was the smoking gun for sure. Has a problem occurred, we kind of strike this out because don't just simply ask, have you opened a support ticket? Say, you can even make the assumption, I'm assuming you've got a support ticket for this, so is there some logging information we can dig into as part of that ticket, right? Just asking the question, did you open a support ticket, has no value, right? So you want high-value questions. That's a good way to put it. High-value questions that are going to elicit high-value answers to help you move in the next direction. Downtime, yeah. So they may respond that they have to schedule downtime or something like that to perform the test. So let's do a little review. We got 12 minutes left, so we're doing good on time. So really, what we went through was the VCDX program overview, and we went through some tips, and we talked about the design scenario and the troubleshooting scenario specifically to give you an idea how that will roll out. So for everybody listening, what are your next steps? Well, if you haven't already done so, I would say the first step is pick a defense date, because it's always easier to pick the date you want to defend on and then drive yourself to that date. It gives you an endpoint to work towards. Then select your design, and then start doing all these things. Prepare your application, start working on your presentation deck, do some mock defenses, which could be remote. They don't have to be in person. Find a study group, get with a community mentor, do all of the things you think you need to do. All of these things are now available. We've had some good Twitter conversations around how some of the early folks like myself, we didn't have any help. I mean, when I finally wrote up my journey, I remembered back and I was like, wow, that was pretty much nothing. Like, there was no other people to even ask help on. I mean, it was 36 previous people, but at the time, I didn't even know who they were. Right? I didn't know who Wade Holmes was. I didn't know who Alexander Toma was. I didn't know any of these names. I mean, it was a big community. It was a small group of people and a very large pond of people. So when you start working on your presentation deck, keep in mind that this is an overview deck. So when you first come in, you're going to start presenting your project. You want to keep it simple, stupid, right? There's no reason to make a 50-slide deck. You want to hit the highlights, right? So maybe a sample table of contents would be, a slide about you, nothing in depth, just some basic stuff, so we know who you are, where you work, your project, the overview of the project, some of the interesting requirements and constraints and assumptions that you may have had. You don't have to list them all, but maybe there was some good talking points in there. Maybe some highlights around risk management, some diagrams, things like that. The slide deck is something that's very easy for you to refer back to during your session. It's much easier than going back to your documentation. What some people have done is they'll do their sample deck, or they'll do their deck, and within their deck they have what we call back-end slides. So there's some slides after sort of the thank you message or further down the presentation that you never really bring up, but they're reference slides. They have some diagrams or things like that, so you don't have to redraw stuff. So again, it's a visual thing. I'm a visual person, so if I'm in the room, I like to see what you're talking about, so you don't have to redraw the whole thing. But if you've got a diagram from the package, from the design package, that you want to just drop into a slide to pull up on the screen and talk to, by all means do that. Right, have that on a slide so that you can pull that up at any time. You can exit out of the presentation view and you go find the slide and bring it up. So I got a slide with a diagram I just want to show you. I remember when I did mine, I actually think I did that very thing. I had some diagrams ready and waiting in case I needed them. So it's proper planning is always going to be a good idea, right? So that kind of takes us to the end of the 2 hours. It's 11:52. There's 8 minutes left. I have not been looking at the chat window, but I will ask Carl and Joe and Matt, are there any questions in the Q&A that you would like to address verbally? Actually just say the answers or talk about some of the questions?
No, I think we got a majority of it covered in the chat. I mean, a couple of ones that were asked multiple times. If you guys are looking for defense dates, look on the VMTM forum. Chris, Carl, I don't know if there's any other official spots where they're posted, but a lot of people are asking locations and dates. So look on the VMTM VCDX forum. It's a good point for that information.
Yep, yeah. Carl keeps that post up to date, so that is the source of record, I suppose. For anybody, so if dates change or dates get added or things like that, the dates that are out there are pretty well set. So if anything, we would add dates. But yeah, follow that thread or subscribe to the RSS feed for it. Or same thing with the live workshops. I continually update the live workshop post on VMTN as well with the registration links and things like that. So that's our one community area. So that's a good point, Joe. Is it's all out there. The links to all of the blueprints are out there. I mean, it's all trying to keep it all in that one place. Eventually, we'll have some links to the blueprints from VCDX.VMware.com too. Was there any other questions, Matt, that you wanted to cover?
There was a couple around, references on the design and the multiple architects and stuff. So we know that most enterprise designs have multiple architects working on them, and they should all be mentioned. But you don't have to mention, like, if you read a book or if you kind of chatted with somebody in private about it. But everybody that had input into the design should be listed on your design.
Just credited, right? You're talking about the credit?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we've gotten that question in the forums a couple times. So yeah, I just looked at the Q&A window. There's 184 questions. So awesome. I really do. I do want to thank everybody for their time and their attendance, and I again appreciate the technical difficulties. Joe and I will try to do a voice over IP test with a recording for the next one, so maybe we can at least broadcast the audio via WebEx. So Joe, we can maybe, when you're not so busy next week or something, before we schedule the next one, we can fire one up as a test. And so we'll get this recording posted on VMTN. I'll probably throw up a blog post on the education blog, the VMware education blog, pointing to it. And we will do these again, and we'll adjust the slides, and we'll adjust the content, and we'll continue to try to catch people who couldn't catch this one live to be able to ask their questions. And with that, everybody can have an awesome weekend. And thank you, Joe and Matt. Really appreciate it. I don't think we could do these without you guys answering the questions for sure.
And by the way, there's still a whole bunch of questions coming in. I'll try and answer these before it ends. But if you guys ever have any questions similar to the ones that you're seeing here, feel free to hit me on email or Twitter, and I'm more than happy to answer them.
Yeah, I'll leave the WebEx up. I'm going to jump into that window as well. I'm just going to mute my phone, and we'll see what other questions we have to deal with. So I'll just leave the WebEx up till the top of the hour.